The problem is that AI fundamentally is a retroactive tool. It looks backwards at what exists already and creates pattern out of it, which is insanely helpful as long as that's not where we end, because we can't come up with innovative products looking forward and what people haven't thought about if all we're doing is relying on what people have already thought about and pulling pattern out of that, right? It has to be both together. That's the creative and critical partnership.
That was Jake McKee, the veteran community strategist who argues that we are walking a fine line between efficiency and the death of genuine insight. Welcome to Engines of Creation. I'm your host, Cristian Mastrodonato. In the world of system thinking, we often look at feedback loops. How does a system know when to correct itself? How does it evolve? In the corporate environment, that feedback loop is supposed to be the community. But community can be misunderstood. It can be treated as a cost center, a way to deflect support tickets, or a place to contain angry users. Today, we deconstruct that view. I'm sitting down with Jake McKee to discuss what he calls the Octopus Theory. It's the idea that community isn't a silo. It is a central nervous system with tentacles reaching into product, marketing, and advocacy. It is about moving from transactional support to a model where everybody goes home happy, where the value exchange between the builder and the user is mutual and compounded. We also go deep into the friction of relationships. In an era where generative AI promises frictionless experiences and synthetic users for testing, Jake warns us about the dangers of losing the human element. We discuss why AI shouldn't be viewed as a replacement for connection, since we need creative and critical partners that challenge our assumptions rather than just confirming them. If you're building a platform, a product, or a movement, you need to understand the physics of these relationships. And so, let's go. Welcome, everyone, to Engines of Creation. I'm very grateful to have you today, Jake McKee. And we're going to have a great conversation about community, about products, and about a lot of interesting things. So, Jake, why don't you start, please, introducing yourself to our listeners?
Sure. My name is Jake McKee. I'm what I have said for years with a smile on my face. I'm a longtime community guy. So I've been building a career for many years now around helping disparate groups talk to each other. That may be engineering and creative, but it also very often for me is communities and community members and companies, right? How do I help a company connect with their most passionate, most engaged, most potentially engaged customers and potential customers?
I find very interesting and engaging the community side that you bring in your work. And it's something we touched a few times in the podcast, but I believe from completely different perspectives. And I think you take a practical approach. Okay, what can we do with a community to create value from the community, and how do we get back? So let me dive down to understand more your practice. I heard you talking about your Octopus Theory, where you suggest that community engagement per se is not just a function, it's not just or a specific team, but it has tentacles that touch different aspects of an organization. So when they want to engage to a community, they have to engage in it as a system and touching it from different perspectives. So can you dive down a little bit more and explain what you mean with that and what's the right approach to sort of deal with this octopus?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me take a one or two steps back to set this up. So community as a thing has traditionally had some struggles with executive leadership, with teams, internal teams, to be perceived as or seen as something more than just a cost center. And in many cases, companies have for a long time thought about community engagement, getting out and directly connecting with the people that love your product the most or the most active with your product, they've thought about it either as something they have to do because they want to avoid, the online masses getting upset with them. So they just have to engage in order to sort of keep that at bay. Or sort of the next tier down is, well, we're going to go beyond that. We're going to use the community and our most passionate users, sorry, for peer-to-peer support. That if we have a community, then we can start laying off our call center agents because we'll turn all over all of the support to the peers to help each other. And these are valid pieces of thought to a certain extent, right? There is a lot of value in peer-to-peer support, but what I've always believed, and my mantra for 20 something years, has been everybody goes home happy. The idea there is that the company and the community base, the customers, have to feel some level of value and impact on their participation. A company doesn't and shouldn't be creating community programs or platforms simply to help out, right? It is really meant to be impactful for the business. The same way that customers are not going to engage with the company if it's not impactful for themselves, right? And so finding this balance between really understanding and being able to communicate from one side to the other is really important, right? A company needs to go out and say, look, we understand you as community members, as customers. Here's the things you need. We've talked to you, we've engaged with you, we understand you. And in order to deliver those things for you, here's what I need, right? We want to sell more boxes. And if we sell more boxes, then you get to have the extra pieces in that boxes that you might want, right? To use the Lego metaphor. Um, but the reality is that I'm a big believer in not just taking this very relationship based approach to doing business. And again, that is what we're doing, is creating a relationship between company and customers. We want that to be a relational activity, right? We want to really understand them, but also, understand ourselves. What is it we need? How do we talk about that? And how do we do it honestly and transparently with confidence, right? Nobody, when I say to you, hey man, it's good to connect with you. I'm hoping I might be able to meet product team leaders. Do you have any in your network you might be able to help me out with? Right? That level of directness is important to the value of that conversation. Just like saying, "Hey, I'm selling boxes and that's what I need to have happen." But when I sell boxes and when I do that and I can talk to my leadership about the fact that I'm selling more boxes right now because we have deeper, better advocacy happening within our community base and they're advocating for us on our behalf, there's shared value there, right? And I can talk to the leadership about why community matters. Now, to your octopus theory, with all that set up, my overarching mantra is everybody goes home happy, right? That's the concept. But as we start to think about how that breaks down into practice, I always like to think about the community work as this octopus theory, right? That anything that we do has eight tentacles that expand out into other parts indirectly, right? So yeah, we may say we're going to ask for product feedback on this new product and we're going to select a small group of people from the community to come participate with our product team. Now, the straightforward sort of business level thinking is great. We'll bring in some people, we'll ask them some questions, and then we'll send them on their way, and we'll never talk to them again. Very much how traditional market research works, which is an important part of the process. But with a community lens, what I hear and what I think about as a community guy is, okay, first of all, the first tentacle is how do I get people inside the company excited about working with the community? Tentacle two is how do I get the community excited about volunteering to participate, right? Because the fact that we're asking is in and of itself a value point, right? We don't have to be hidden. We don't have to be top secret. That's not the point. Market research people will deal with the statistically valid. I want the statistically invalid opinions, right? What are the representative voices saying? What are the leaders in the community doing and saying? How are they articulating things? So tentacle two was, let's put this out there that we're going to do it because this is going to be something that can rally the community. Tentacle three is, what's the selection process? What are people learning from us and about us as a company by how we go about selecting the right members and announcing the right members and onboarding the right members? Once we get them into the product team, how do we start to do more than just ask them for feedback on this one project at this one time? Can we create something more than just a single market research panel? Can we create what I call a community driven product development group, right? So, how do we get 5 or 10 or 50 people that are sort of at the beck and call at arm's length from the product team? So anytime that they're researching the second and third and fourth questions they might have, there's this group of people standing by ready to go. And in doing all this stuff, how do we create the baseline and the understanding for what marketing messages are going to resonate? How do we set the baseline for advocacy, user-based advocacy, when we launch? Because now we have this group of people that feel like they helped to design this product themselves, right? This is theirs as much as it's the company's. How do we empower them and send them back out into the community once that program is done to talk in the right ways, in the right limited, NDA limited ways that might exist? How do we empower them to go speak and advocate on behalf of the thing that they just spent some period of time helping to create, right? So as you can see, we're not just saying, hey, we want to do this one thing to learn this one thing, get this one report. What we're doing is saying, how do we build a relationship over time with these multiple points of connection, multiple points of value, multiple thought processes of how step one leads to step two, not just how do we embrace and sort of sequester step one to be the only thing that we're going to do, right? We want this to be the beginning of a relationship. And this is a relational activity. If you think about this very simply in the context of, you and I getting to know each other, there's 15 different ways that we're going to get to know each other. I don't have to just say, I'm only going to meet you to only have this podcast interview and then I'll never talk to you again. I want to talk to you again. I want our conversation today to lead to the better next one tomorrow and on and on and on. And that's sort of the community mindset and the concept behind that octopus theory.
That's very deep, and I understand how these octopus can have all these many tentacles, going with the
Right.
metaphor. Of course, if you look at from a system perspective, bringing the whole community in the conversation, it implies another order of magnitude of it from the point of view of approaching the problem. In the sense, of course, there are opportunities, but you need to look at things very differently. We're going to get back into that in a second, but I wanted to clarify one thing with you. One thing I was wondering is, I appreciate that it is the group dynamic in many sorts, and it's something I've touched, for example, in a previous episode some time ago with Claudio Schwalitz. In that case, was community-based decision making, so it's kind of a different situation, but with similarities, of course. And one of the things that's very important when you do this group deliberation, of course, is facilitation. Is making sure everyone has a fair element of they can express fairly their voice. They're listened to, knowing that there are different personalities. Some people are louder, and some people are more timid. And so, how can you make sure this process? How can I say all these tentacles are of the right length? I don't know if you can want to stay in the metaphor.
Yeah.
But really, how you can bring everyone in the same level, irrespective of where they're coming from, their personalities or attitude.
Yeah, it's an extremely good question, and one that I wish we talked in our overall industry much more about more often, because it's sort of the fundamental piece of this. The octopus theory doesn't mean that every tentacle is equally prioritized, equally in action. If one tentacle has to do one thing at a certain level, then the other one has to do. No, an octopus doesn't use every tentacle the exact same way, right? Some don't even get used at particular moments. They're there. We can use them when we need to, but I may only be using one to grab something at the moment, right? Or I may be using all 8 to move across the ocean floor. And I think that's the same thing here. It is really choosing, the direction that we're moving in. I will say one of the things that I think is, I hear this all the time. I've heard it for years and years from people who say, oh my God, if we start asking customers for feedback, then one or two doomsday scenarios comes up. One is, we'll have to do everything they say. No, you don't. Your job, as the company person, as the community person, in my role, is to understand what to react to and what not to react to. How to say, and again, this is relational. Every time my wife says, "Hey, I want something changed," I don't immediately say, "Okay, I'll change everything." Sometimes I say, "Yep, that's fair. I understand it immediately." Sometimes I say, "Can you tell me more information?" Sometimes I say, "No, that's not something I'm willing to do." Right? So there is, but the way that I go about that in a relational mindset is not to just, turn it into a spreadsheet, right? It's to have a conversation. It's to share information about why I'm saying no, not just to say no, right? And so I think that's part of the role here is as you move more into this community engagement mindset, it is to figure out how do you have conversations honestly and how do you say no in a way that people go, that's fair, not to ignore the thing that you don't want to talk about, that sort of thing. The other big piece that I very often hear is, oh my God, we can't keep any secrets. If we start opening up to the community, then, we'll lose our secrets that we're trying to develop this brand new product and secret. And if we get people involved, then it'll leak out. And, the reality is that that's just not true most of the time. There's ways to get around that. My biggest problem in doing these programs is not keeping things secret. It's empowering them to go speak after they have completed the program because they're so scared of getting in trouble with the lawyers, right? That they don't want to talk. And so, we want people to say, this program was amazing. I've had more leaks happen. 90% of the leaks in life that I've had to deal with in my career have come from the company themselves, and not the members of these sorts of groups. They enjoy it. This is something that's really fun for them. They don't want to mess up the opportunity to be invited back, right? But at the end of the day, the role for me is not just to get the program in place and then say, okay, we're turning everything over to the users. It's not that. It's to guide a new member of the team, so to speak, right? The same way that if we hire somebody full time onto our product development team, we have to onboard them. We have to tell them what they can and can't talk about outside the four walls. We have to help them understand the culture of our product development team and what we're doing and why we're doing it. And there's a sort of natural, it's not my employee agreement that keeps me from talking. It's my, talking about what we're working on. Much more than that, it is my desire to see something really great happen at the end. And I know that if I, as an employee, start going out and leaking things to the press about this cool thing we're working on before it's done, then that messes up my opportunity to be part of something really cool, right? So the reality, though, of what this role of customer engagement is about is more of a sort of an intelligence community, CIA intelligence analyst, right? I don't know if you remember hearing the stories back at the beginning of the Iraq War so many years ago. The U.S. leadership was taking the raw intelligence feed and reading it before it had gotten interpreted, vetted, turned into real data, or sorry, real intelligence. It was just the raw data. And half of it wasn't real and half of it was, and trying to understand what was good in that content and what wasn't really relevant in that content was the job of the CIA and their intelligence analysts, right? But when the leadership started paying attention to the raw feed, they got really worked up and made some really bad decisions because there was no interpretation layer in between, right? No assessment layer in between. And I think that's a lot of what people like me do is this assessment process of we have all this data coming in, we have all these opinions, we have all these thoughts. How do we sort of navigate between the two worlds, right? The internal and external worlds. How do we see that when they say, when a community member who's participating in one of these programs says, I hate this thing, do they really hate it and not want it there? Or do they hate the way that it's implemented in some particular way that drives them personally nuts, right? Those are two very different outcomes and choices to make for product development moving forward and all that sort of thing. And having conversations, a big part of what I do is teach product teams how to have these conversations, right? How to have, when you're sitting in front of five engineers and your five engineers are on the other side of the table, how do you make sure that that conversation is leading to a relationship, not just gathering data, right? Because I can gather as much data as I want in that one call, but if I build the relationship, I can gather data and insights, not just data, but insights for years to come, right? But that requires some really clear understanding of, you don't just walk into the CIA and sit down and start analyzing intelligence. You have to understand cultural context. You have to understand, human cues. You have to understand a lot of different things about the space before you can start actually providing assessment, right? And turning that raw data into something that is useful and matters and is realistic.
I think it's very interesting how the interaction with community becomes so multifaceted and you have to start considering all these different aspects. Yeah, my question was in a sense very naive for sure. I'm here trying to learn, and I find very interesting now already seeing all your answer that sort of open up like so many different ideas and dimensions and things you have to consider when you interact with the community.
Well, and I'll say, on that point, I think that's fair. And also, so there is a lot of stuff to consider. And also, we have all kinds of training for this, right? We have every single human alive has spent the entirety of their lives learning how to build relationships with other humans. And at its core, community work is a relational, humanistic task. If I were to say to you, "Hey, we've recently met and we both did some things and some behaviors and asked some questions and came up with some answers in order to help build our relationship to be closer and be more effective when we sat down and had this podcast." And if I started listing all the details and the steps and the processes that I went through and you went through to come to this place that we're sitting here on this podcast and we have some sense of each other and we're getting to know each other, if I wrote all those steps down, it would feel overwhelming, right? The same way that when I talk about it from my perspective as an expert in the field, and I start giving you all the details, the way I think and the stuff that I'm looking for and the theories and processes I come into, it can feel really overwhelming. The advice I always give to clients and people I'm speaking in front of and all that sort of thing is, at its core, this is building a human to human relationship. You already know how to do that. But sometimes if you go and meet somebody or you go into a new culture, right? I travel overseas, for instance, and I go into, I don't know, I walk into the airport in Turkey. They may have different customs. They may have a different language, but fundamentally, the way that I connect with them is not going to be that different once I understand some of those high level pieces, right? Once I know how to either translate the language or speak the language, once I understand some basic local customs and the culture that I'm in, once I understand where the boundaries are for some of the legalities that I might be facing different than my own country, then it's pretty basic, right? It's pretty straightforward. Yeah, every person and every culture is different, but we're not so fundamentally different that we can't understand each other when we have some basic structures in place. And that's really at its core, that's what I do, is help companies figure out what are those basic pieces that we need in place to understand each other so that we can have a great relationship. Because, if I have a great relationship with you, then all kinds of cool stuff happens, right? In this case, you may meet another podcaster and say, "I know exactly the guest you need to have. Here's Jake," right? Or when we're talking about, fun non-work stuff, you may reach out and say, "Hey, I was really wanting to get into some 3D printing because you do that too, right?" Which I do. And I'm more than happy to help get you up to speed because you're brand new at it, let's say. So that's based on that relationship. The same way that we're building the relationship between company and community is so that we can get better relationship foundationally built so that when stuff comes up, when things go wrong, I've got advocates on my corner. I've got grace, right? And so if we release a new version of our digital app and it goes sideways, there's some problem with it that everybody doesn't immediately uninstall because they don't care about us. They don't know us. We're just some cold corporate entity. And now they're upset because the software sucks. You go, this is a pretty bad release, but the last 5 have been perfectly fine. So I know they'll fix it. I'm just going to stick around and make do for a minute. Maybe even give them some feedback about what I'm seeing so that they can know what to fix, right? Very different outcomes. But that's all, again, based on its core concept of we are building relationships with other humans differently at a larger scale for different purposes than our personal relationships. But we have all those skills sort of baked into us.
I love this remark, and I think it's so interesting to focus on relationship because I think sometimes we tend to forget about relationship and human relationships. There are a bunch of things I would like to come back on community, but I think this last remark you made around human relationship kind of forced me to ask you about AI because
Right.
looks like it's going to change the landscape. So I know you're actually currently working on AI experience design. And then I think in a world where generative AI can simulate conversations, I know you argue that we need to design relationships better
Mhm.
between humans and intelligent systems. And it goes back to the relationships point. And how's that going to work? Are we risking somehow to removing the natural frictions that happens in relationship in community that are not necessarily obvious or are not necessarily easy. Earlier, to just a few seconds ago, you talked about sometimes of if you go through all the steps you have to make, it actually look overwhelming, even if it's stuff that you know what to do. Is this dynamic going to change? I expect yes, and but how is going to change when we bring the AI interface so much closer into the community?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and there's a lot of different directions I could go for trying to answer that. So I'll try and keep some of them short. We can explore what makes sense. But at its core, one we're both changing a lot of things and not changing much at all at the same time, right? The reality is that I still am going to need product teams to be innovative. I'm still going to need to have human connection in the product development space so that the products that come out of it work well for real humans, right? And the challenge right now is that it is so sexy, so immediately sexy to think about the fact that when I implement AI, I can lay off all my call center and I'll just use chatbots instead. And then look how much money I'll save. There's some problems with that. It's so easy to look at AI and say, man, I never have to do any user testing again. All I have to do is create some synthetic data and some synthetic users, and I can whack away at as many prototypes that I've vibe coded with those synthetic users doing synthetic testing. And then I never have to do user testing again and everything will be great. It's really sexy to be thinking about how fast we can do that much, right? And I think at the end of the day, that's true right now, but we're almost certainly going to see some level of backlash, probably sooner than later, right? The difference between the AI transformation and the digital transformation is the digital transformation when the internet came around and we were starting to really implement websites into our core business workflows. We were starting to replace certain offline businesses with these online businesses, or at least append them. Our model for commerce dramatically changed and our expectations about commerce changed. But that didn't happen in 6 months, right? We had a period of time to kind of play with some things, to struggle with some things, to, as you say, I love this idea of good friction. There is good friction in how we do things. Sometimes not getting something right points us in a better direction, more so than if we just keep getting yeses over and over again. And that is the rough messiness of relationship, right? A relationship where it's nothing but yeses is smooth. It's not easy to grab onto. It's not easy to be important to me. It's the ones that, when you're late one day and you say, you show up and you say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. That was on me. My bad." I go, "Wow, he really owns that he was late. That's cool. I like him." There was that friction that allowed me to grab onto the relationship, to grab onto you as a person, right? So figuring out how to append our workflows rather than replace them, I think is the core issue of the AI era, right? There are many things and many jobs that will get in some way replaced or appended to a great extent. But I think when we look at overall workflows, how we superpower our relationship building rather than replace it is the big question for me. An example of that is a product manager can now vibe code very quickly 50 different prototypes. Then they can put it in front of that group of synthetic users and get some results that might be really interesting. That cannot be where the process ends. That cannot be the way that we now replace our traditional product design workflows with this new AI-driven product development workflow that is all AI and no humans, right? We have to be thinking about AI as a creative and critical partner, because that is the way that we make a lot more progress a lot faster while still making sure that it's successful progress. Meaning, a product manager who says to themselves, "I'm not really sure what to ask when I do my customer interviews. I've got some ideas, but it just doesn't, nothing feels like it's popping. Okay, you know what? I'm going to put some data into ChatGPT, or I'm going to create a group of synthetic users to have a synthetic conversation with, right?" That's not meant to answer the questions. That's meant to give me the discussion points. It's not data points, it's discussion points, right? And once I have those discussion points in my head, then I can know better and faster what to go talk to humans about, right? And vet against, kind of move that process along much faster. But it's because I'm coming into it with better questions or more specific questions that allow us to have better conversations, right? That's the creative and critical partnership. It doesn't mean that we don't make 50 prototypes. It just means that before we jump into, let's just make some prototypes, throw it in front of some synthetic users and see what the result is, we start thinking about how do we put parts of the AI and human working together into the workflow so that the whole thing gets supercharged, right? We can play with more things, we can ask more questions, we can get better answers, we can get better outcomes, better products at the end because we have appended our workflow with this depth of pattern recognition. And I literally spoke at an event last night to product managers, and several of them afterwards were talking about how much fear they have that we're going to basically just eliminate the human in this process altogether, and somehow we're going to plug in the data and out comes new ideas. The problem is that AI fundamentally is a retroactive tool. It looks backwards at what exists already and creates pattern out of it, which is insanely helpful as long as that's not where we end, because we can't come up with innovative products looking forward and what people haven't thought about if all we're doing is relying on what people have already thought about and pulling pattern out of that, right? It has to be both together. That's the creative and critical partnership. We are the innovative looking forward humans. We have now this amazing tool to help guide us to coming up with new ideas based on what's already happened or missing gaps in between existing process and patterns and that sort of thing.
Definitely lots to think about. And it's very interesting, of course, the way you frame the problem. I'd like to follow up on something you alluded to, and you talked about workflows. So, can we expect a, a hybrid community, a combination of human and artificial agents that are part of this community, and they each contributing in different parts of the process? Am I understand it correctly?
I'm going to block this into two different parts of this answer because I hear a lot of this conversation about where's the line between human and AI and how are we going to recognize that line when we are out participating in a community, for instance, right? Let's say I do scale modeling for fun and I'm on a scale modeling community and I'm asking questions that I want to know from real humans, but an AI bot comes in masquerading as an individual to answer because that's their latest technology they've added to this particular community is the AI moderator who can come in and answer questions for me, but it's humanistic, right? Um, on one hand, how you go about adding that workflow is important. Pretend that there's a human, but it's actually AI participating and you're trying to obfuscate that. What's the value there? Right? There's not a lot of I don't want to talk to an AI agent any more than I want to have a Twitter debate with a Russian troll bot, right? I want to understand that there are real people with real opinions, no matter how humanistic the AI can sound, right? But there is a lot of interesting, truly uniquely interesting ideas for how I understand how to run my community, how to build those relationships, right? If I'm a community manager in charge of a community that has thousands of people in it, and AI can help me identify patterns that will point to, but not necessarily define, who might be friendly with each other. And it gives me, as a moderator behind the scenes, it gives me tools that said, these two people are talking about struggling with the same issue. You should go introduce them. That is amazing, right? That's like having a colleague that I don't have to pay for, right? That on my team that I don't have to manage, but is helping me do a lot of those sort of manual labor type of tasks that allow me to be a really great event host, so to speak, right? That sounds amazing. Putting a chatbot into the community to act as another member and not telling anybody, that sounds awful. And it sounds like trust breaking immediately, right? And if anybody finds out about that's how it's going, then it calls into question a huge part of the reason why I'm not on Twitter anymore is because it's called into question the validity of the people I'm engaging with, right? I don't want to engage with fake users or Russian troll bots or AI agents or any of that. I don't care. In fact, not only do I not care, I don't want to participate on the entire platform because I can't be sure who's real and who's not, right? And I think really being cognizant of what happens when we replace our relationships with synthetic relationships. If I'm not, y- you know, if I'm hiring a friend to come hang out with me, it's not going to be the same as an organically built relationship over time, right? I can't ask the same things. Somebody's grandmother watching the kids versus a paid nanny watching the kids may be very different. Babysitter coming over just for the evening. They all serve a certain function of being able to allow me to go out when I have a new baby, actually get out of the house. But the way that the long-term relationship with that baby builds can be very different if it's an occasional babysitter versus a regularly present grandmother, right? And how those things work is important to design as well. And I think it's going to be really easy and really problematic, hugely problematic. We're already starting to see this problem of what is AI and what is human. Where are we using the AI to simply fake when I call a customer service line and it says, "Hello, I'm Diane. It's nice to meet you." But it's a recorded voice, right? It's an AI tool, and it's not telling me that. Man, I feel immediately undervalued. I understand immediately, or at least I believe immediately, that company's priorities are cost savings, not customer relationships, right? And that has an impact on the long term. It may have a really nice impact for the short term because the CEO gets to go to Wall Street and say, "Hey, for this quarterly results, we dropped our costs by 40%." But then they may have to go back the next quarter and say, well, our revenues dropped by 60% because nobody wants to talk to us or engage with us anymore because nobody trusts us anymore. Right. So it is a requirement to think much longer term than what modern business has turned into, which is this quarterly result mindset.
Yeah, that fits a lot into recent conversation on product strategy, actually, with Roman Pichler. And there was this element of thinking also from a product perspective, these longer feedback loops when you talk about strategy and vision even more. And I can see a connection here from the perspective exactly of what's the impact that, just trying to get to the sort of short term financial return versus sort of a longer term relationship that you want to build. And stressing again, on my side, the word relationships, because it's very hard to build trust and it's very easy to break it. And I think that's
Right.
where it goes into your point.
Yeah. And I think, the other thing I'll add in this world that we're in is that, on one hand, product teams are being told very specifically and very regularly, you need to be more customer centric. You need to be more customer focused. You need to understand customers better. You need to get out there and connect with them more to learn more, be more customer centric. But we're not doing a very good job of both the instruction of what that means and how to do it, right? Uh, you can't tell a 16-year-old who's never had a date in his life, well, just go get a date, right? You have to actually maybe say, well, here's how you ask somebody out, and here's how to be polite about that. You have to gotta give them some structure that they can work under and learn under, right? You have to give them some sort of warm start to the process. And I think, this idea of executive leadership, product leadership, telling their product teams, go be more customer centric, but not giving them the tools to do it is part of the problem that we're facing right now, especially in the AI world, where it's so much easier to just go get this immediate response, right? And we're not. You can't be customer centric if you cut your customers out of the process altogether. But also, we're not really doing much to tell product teams how to manage this customer centricity concept, how to understand it, how to implement it, and now how to even balance it against AI, not replace it with, but balance it against AI. And I think the other part of this is that customer centricity piece comes with allowing product teams to be thinking longer term, right? To restructure the culture of your product team so that every product version isn't a start over of the project, right? We don't say, okay, version 1 we've completed, we've gold mastered it, we've sent it out, we're done. Now let's start version 2 and it's a completely different process, right? I'm encouraging product teams that are working on the product that they're on today to also be thinking about what happens in 4 versions from now, right? In a way that we have talked about. Some product teams are good at it, some of them aren't. But we have to get away from this sort of self-contained ideation, build, launch, start over mindset, right? We have to be thinking more about these platforms that uh, either we're not just making this one product, we're doing this thing that will change and grow over time, so that as we build this service, we're building this community, and even if that community group that we just engage with for the V1 product, we sort of roll off, we now know that we're going to roll on somebody else as part two, right? As part three, as or version three, product three, whatever, so that we are thinking much longer term. We still have to deliver in the short term, but we have to be thinking about how decisions we do now are impacting the future as well. To the point of, it may be really wonderful right now, today, in this product that we're working on, to go set up those synthetic users and do some, do the 50 prototypes and pick one and run with it. But if we do that all in a vacuum and we launch this net new product that the world hasn't seen before, and it's great, when we go to do version two, we don't have anything. There's no built up advocacy. We don't have any best practices in place for how we engage with customers. The product team hasn't really learned how to engage with real humans, to learn from them and to share and to get them excited and ready to be advocates for us. If we want that down the road, we're starting completely from scratch rather than starting to plant those seeds that grow over time and start to compound interest on each other, right? So when we do V1 and we set up some basic programs, then when we do V2, we've already got that basic piece in place, and now we can do more. By the time we get to V4, we've got all kinds of stuff at our ready. We've got a community of customers that are passionate and advocates for us, but that has to build over time. We can't say, "Oh, great, AI is here. We're going to go sequester ourselves in a quiet room alone and never talk to anybody again and have really great results." Right? That's where the octopus theory comes in. We have to be thinking about the other seven tentacles, not just the one that we're working on at the moment. That's part of the work, right? Hopefully, it can help make that easier for teams, but that is part of the work. It's really great when we do one thing and it has seven other tentacles that reach out, right? But the flip side of that coin is we have to think about the other seven tentacles. We can't just go running into a doorway too small to fit them all, so to speak.
I like your reference to the platform thinking, actually, because the way I'm understanding this, there is a lot of thinking from a platform perspective when you are building a product, and you alluded to that, and being able to have something that can enable multiple things, again with the octopus reference. But the way I'm getting what you just explained, the community itself is a platform that you're building. You're kind of building two platforms at the same time. You're building your product platform, we can call it, whatever you want to sell, whatever value you want to deliver. And you're building this community alongside, knowing that, yeah, it's going to have different facets and it's going to grow in different ways. Does it make sense? Am I getting in the right way?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I think you're right. You're building the platform for the product itself. You're building the platform that is the community. And then you're also building this platform that is the connection of both of those things, right? That the product, you hope, is in and of itself community building, right? That you are thinking about what features can we add. There's all kinds of stories from all kinds of brands and products and digital, physical, doesn't matter, about people adding in silly little things that make me as a human connect to this product or service in a way that I might not otherwise, right? When I've had some monthly like delivery services for my scale model hobby, where I'll get a box of interesting new paints and paintbrushes and maybe some little instructional guides, or whatever it might be. And that's all related to the hobby. I signed up for that monthly box subscription service because I wanted the hobby side of it. But when it shows up and it has a piece of British candy, because it comes from the UK, he always puts a piece of British candy in there just as a extra little bonus. And here I am talking about this to you because of the candy, not because of the good, solid stuff, really interesting things in the box. But it's that extra little piece that you think about, how do we create some emotional texture to this, right? It's not just delivering the best product and being done. It's having an inside joke as part of the development, right? So if you ever, if you have a product that needs to be serviced, when you pull the access panel off, it has a funny joke inside, right? The Snapple cap that has the joke, or the funny inspirational statement, whatever they are, underneath the cap. Does it do anything for the product itself? When I open the Snapple and it's got a funny phrase inside the cap, does it taste any different? Absolutely not. But here I am talking about it, right? It's giving me something that's this emotional texture that I can feel, right? And if I'm feeling something, I'm much more likely to be connected to it, right? If I'm connected to it, then I'll advocate for it, I'll defend it, I'll stick with it through thick and thin. And that's kind of what we're trying to build towards is that sort of that's what I mean when I say platform thinking, right? Platform thinking is hard to talk about because we immediately engineers think about, oh, that's APIs. Oh, that's standards, physical standards. If we talk about it in the community space, the platform is the actual technology that is running the way that the discussion board itself that allows me to log on, allows me to have a conversation with somebody else. When I say platform, I mean, what is the overall structure for how we think about this product beyond just the one use case of, this microphone is this microphone and it uses it. Yeah, I use it to record audio. Okay, cool. But platform thinking means, is the cord that plugs into it interchangeable with others so that it's easy for me to move it in and out? Is it easy for me to take this microphone and put it on the shelf behind me and have it look good when it sits on this shelf back here when I'm not using it, and have people go, oh, that's a cool looking thing. And it becomes a starting point for conversation. Does it need to look amazing and beautiful and not like every other microphone ever made? No, it doesn't need to. But the thing that's going to make sure that it's a Yeti microphone is the fact that it's this cool blue with this interesting shape that almost looks like a little man holding it, right? And that it sits back, that I'm willing to put it up on my shelf for display behind my Zoom rather than just throw it in the drawer somewhere, right? That's the platform thinking, is how do I have this tentacle mindset? How does it build in, when I open the package, does it have something that says, if you like this, talk to somebody else about it. If you like this, go online and help other peers. If you're a great audio engineer, you know, uh, you can help others, right? These are the platform thinkings in the sense that all the elements start to connect to each other and build on each other. And the fact that, I'm talking about Yeti microphones isn't just a function of how good the quality is, but it's that I get them as a company. I see them as a group of humanistic people who literally designed the stand for the microphone to look like this abstract human holding the microphone, right? That's just fun. It's just cool to talk about. It's makes me feel like I'm part of something bigger than myself instead of just buying the best microphone and being done and never thinking about it again, right? That's the platform thinking I'm thinking about.
Yeah, thanks for going deeper into that. And there are these words. Platform is one of those that tend to become buzzwords, and you tend to mean with those words a lot
Right.
of different things.
Right.
And in a way, it's fine. But I appreciate that also looking from the different angles and different skills and crafts. So it actually gives way more value. So I think we are getting towards the end. It was incredibly valuable conversation, and I think it personally so far I learned a lot of things around the
Good.
value of community and how community can actually be part of your platform, as we just discussed, and how it's different from other approaches seen so far. So I would go to the last questions that I ask everyone, but very curious to hear your answer. And what are the characteristics of a leader who embraces complexity for you?
Characteristics of a leader who embraces complexity. I think it's a really good question with a lot of different answers. So let me just share a few thoughts on it. I don't know if it's the best characteristics, but I definitely have some thoughts about the complexity piece. So the first one is, when it comes to leading through complex environments, as a community nerd, I always like to talk about what is the higher calling that we're here to serve. Because no matter what the level of complexity is, no matter what kind of complexity there is there, it's really, really easy to lose track of why you're there in the first place, dealing with that complexity when things are complex, right? So if I have a to-do list of 50 different items, for the day, I'm not going to get to all of them. 50 is too many to do in one day. I have to make some prioritization and some choices. But I also have to say to myself, okay, out of those 50, I can't just prioritize the ones that are the most fun. I can't prioritize the ones that are the easiest. I have to have some sort of guiding principle. Today, I want to get this client project out the door. And so I need to focus on those three things that matter the most in doing that, right? I have to look at my schedule and say, what are the things that have to be done today or else there's a problem, right? I got to pay my taxes on time or else the IRS is going to come after me and I'm going to be in trouble. Okay, that becomes a priority. Complexity for me is so often a function of disorganization, confusion, discomfort, fear, uh, you know, lack of a North Star that we're looking at and saying, this is why we're doing what we're doing in the first place. And when you sort of pause and say, okay, anything complex can be boiled down into some pretty straightforward issues that are driving that sense of complexity, that fear of complexity, the complexities themselves. I've had employees that have worked for me over the years that have come to me and said, "Oh my God, this thing is broken. We've got to fix it right away." Okay, cool. And they're always sort of thrown off when I'm really calm, and I'm like, "No, no, I'm upset about it as well." But the complexity itself, the importance of the task, none of that really matters to solving it. The only thing that matters to solving it is figuring out what's the overall problem and how does that address, how does that connect with our overall function? So if I'm running a community and the gamification system breaks and nobody, it's not allowing people to post on the site, then fixing that is the problem, right? Getting us back up and running on that is the challenge right now. And what is it going to take to fix that challenge? Well, we got to identify what the problem is. We've got to figure out who can fix it. And then we got to make sure that they've got the right answers for how to fix it. None of the rest of the other pieces matter just yet. Right. And so, leadership so much of especially the higher you go in a company is really about the triage process of what's the most important to deal with. How do we skip the things that make stuff more complex, but aren't actually important for us to address right now? How do we create some of those plans and prioritizations? And, there's a lot of spaces where product managers right now are dealing with things like, prioritization overwhelm, right? And prioritization confusion. When we can make anything, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? Or as my dad so often says, that I've now taken on his phrase as my own, there's no greater burden than a golden opportunity. And these days, we're surrounded by golden opportunities. If I'm a product manager who creates 50 different prototypes, that seems really cool on its surface, but I'm adding complexity that doesn't necessarily help me, right? I'm just creating a bunch of golden opportunities and I immediately am going to feel the burden of that, right? That's a very different process than, hang on, first of all, before we create 50 prototypes going all over the place, why are we doing any prototypes? Do we already know from the community what needs to happen next? Are we doing are we doing prototypes simply because doing new stuff is sexier than creating updates to existing things? Are we addressing problems because we are trying to be as innovative and forward looking as possible? And the only way to do that is to create 50, right? But being really clear about, who we are, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve as a starting point, I think is one of the best ways to eliminate complexity, because I've always discovered that complexity doesn't come from things being inherently too complex. It comes from me not having a really clear direction on where I'm going or why I'm going there. So everything starts to feel really complex. Yeah, there's complexity. I mean, if I'm running an airline and trying to fly, keep, 700 planes in the air at once without them, crashing into each other or, landing at the wrong airport, that is complex. But the way we deal with the complexity is to start to break those systems down based on what we're struggling with, what we need to have help with, what we already know is just best practice. Let's just do that. And then make small increments to improve the overall, to simplify things, right? To cut out things that are unnecessary. But, again, it all starts with simplifying. To me, it all starts with simplifying. Why are we here? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? And how do we keep that front and center so that even when we're doing complex activities, they don't feel like complexity we're struggling with.
I love that. Giving this sense of focus and direction, and you use the word at the beginning of your answer, you use the word North Star, and that's what
Mm,
really matters. It matters even more, as you alluded to, when you are dealing from a community standpoint. It helps keeping everyone aligned. And there are a lot of
right.
conversation often around culture, and how you to build the right culture exactly, because that's what keeps the North Star and helps everyone dealing with all the complexity that inevitably you have to face. That was a great way to end this conversation. So Thanks a lot, Jake. It was very, very interesting. We learned a lot of things today, and so hopefully we will be able to continue the conversation soon. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And if your listeners are interested, they can always find me at my website, jakemckee.com. And, if you are a product team struggling with these sorts of issues of, my leadership has told me to be more customer centric, but I need some help and some training and some support on both understanding what that means, but also how to execute it, then I'm here.
Absolutely. And for anyone interested, I'm going to put the link also in the description of this episode so that you can reach out to Jake if you want to talk more to him. So thanks a lot again for being here today.
Thank you.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.